We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Curt Dalton, the founder of Cannabis.net.
Today we've got a lot of news stories out of the cannabis universe, including right here in Massachusetts, where some multi-state operators got fined big bucks.
And there is some good news out of Massachusetts, as a local podcast streaming company interviewed Senator Markey from Massachusetts, and he had some good predictions about possible cannabis legalization in 2021. But first, let's go to the most respected reporter in the industry, Deb Borchardt, with our Wall Street Minute.
Thanks, Curt. Thanks, Jimmy. Well, this week, Colorado's Department of Revenue reported that in May, they had $192 million in marijuana sales. So far, the state has collected $167 million in tax revenues. And if that remains consistent, they are on track to collect roughly $334 million in taxes for 2020. Also this week, Forefront Ventures reported their earnings. The company had revenue of $16.9 million in the first quarter and net losses of $8.1 million. Also this week, prosecutors in New York argued that the credit card case that's kind of ensnared Ease should move forward. Back in March, two gentlemen, Ruben Wigan and Hamid Ray Akavan, were charged with committing bank fraud. They were charged with creating these fake companies in order to trick banks to do credit card processing for dispensaries, and this was done through an unnamed online marketplace. Now, Ease has not been charged with this. They've not been named in this case, but they were associated with Akavan in a 2019 case. We're going to keep our eyes on it. And that's all for this week. I'm Deb Borchardt with the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
Well, one story that Deborah did not mention is what is going on with High Times in their never-ending pursuit of actually having a successful IPO. Last night, we talked to Teri Buhl from the Cannabis Law Report, and Teri has been on the High Times beat. Curt, she was extremely impressive, wasn't she?
Yeah, she really has been following this story, talking to the SEC, talking to lawyers, and it's going to be a really fascinating, as we've talked about, is there ever going to be an IPO? And we got a chance to ask her that, and she clarified that, yes, there actually will be, but it will not be on NASDAQ, and she thinks that there is one coming at a much lower type of listing platform.
In fact, it could actually be called a mini-IPO. Here's Teri Buhl.
If they try to really list at the end of the quarter, they're going to try to come out at $1. It's going to go down to, let's say, 25 cents. Everyone's going to try to flood and get out of that stock. Then they're going to have a bunch of worthless stock and a ton of debt for all these companies that they're going to try to be, they're trying to buy or said they have a letter of intent. And then they're going to get sued. And maybe the SEC will start to investigate because of the complete lack of disclosure on this deal.
Here in the Bay State in Massachusetts, the Cannabis Control Commission dished out $800,000 in fines to three different entities, one to Garden Remedies and the other to Healthy Farms for using a non-approved pesticide. The other one went to Acreage Holdings and one of their local dispensaries. And Acreage, as you might expect as a multi-state operator, is always changing their business model, their structure of their own company. Now, Curt, a lot of multi-state operators are always looking to push the limit of 3 licenses in any state. And Acreage, obviously trying to do that, but at least now the Cannabis Control Commission said, you can't, we got you. You better let us know if you're going to restructure your own management structure, right?
Basically, there's the Wild West a few years ago, and to be fair, like you mentioned, many companies were trying to get around this rule of 3 licenses in one state, and Acreage eventually got caught with some manipulation of corporation documents and who's the owner and what 51% was sold under the table, and they got a fine for it. And, life goes on, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe another fine or 2 coming down the road, because they weren't the only ones trying to do that.
And other states try to do the exact same thing as well. It doesn't just happen in Massachusetts. Now, speaking of Massachusetts, one of the most popular podcast in the cannabis space is hosted by Mike Crawford from Dig Boston. His podcast is called The Young Jerks. He sat down with the senator, U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, Ed Markey, and Senator Markey basically said if the Democrats do take control of the Senate in the November election, don't be surprised if you do see legalization of cannabis in January, no matter what the soon-to-be new president, Joe Biden, says in his particular platform. Let's check out what Senator Markey said on The Young Jerks.
I think what's going to happen on so many issues is that Congress is a stimulus response institution, and there's nothing more stimulating than what's happening out there on climate change, on cannabis. And after this election, it's going to be pretty clear what the basis of the fumigation was, and that we need to move on these policies and have our own 1933, our own New Deal in January. And marijuana and climate change will be a big part of that change in our country.
And Jimmy, I thought a real interesting part of that interview, great job done by Mike, was that if they do get the House and Senate, they have like a veto-proof vote on it. And my question, which is a new idea, was why would Biden at his age ever veto it? What are you trying? Who are you trying to protect? Which group are you appealing to by doing that veto when your entire party, through the Green Wave and through this environmental program, is standing for it? So I think he does have a point. If they do get the House and Senate and can get this done, I don't think Biden even vetoes it. He may not smile and take pictures and be on the TV that day, but I would be shocked if he would veto something passed by Democratic House and Senate.
And once again, all the representatives in Washington, D.C. are reflecting what's going on in this country right now, which is this green wave, which is the movement towards legalization of cannabis in the United States. So again, listen to the people. And the people now are speaking. I think it's in 8 different states on the ballot in November. It's going to be a fascinating election. And I certainly know that most people who ever watch our show know which way I'm leaning on that one. Okay, speaking of leaning, let's go north of the border now for our Oh Canada report with Solomon Israel from MJBizDaily's International Division.
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canopy Growth Corporation is continuing layoffs as it restructures. Recent layoffs affected 30 operations staff at the company's Smith Falls, Ontario headquarters. Canopy has laid off hundreds of workers so far this year. Ontario's provincial government is giving cannabis stores an extra week to offer home delivery and curbside pickup during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's extending an emergency order to permit those services until July 29th. Private sector cannabis stores in Ontario have called on the government to allow delivery on a permanent basis. And in British Columbia, licensed cannabis store workers are getting their security checks extended. Those screenings used to be valid for only 2 years, but now they'll last for 5 years. BC has screened thousands of cannabis store workers so far, with the goal of keeping organized crime out of the regulated marijuana industry. You can read all those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily.
And one more news item out of Washington, D.C. It seems that the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, and the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, are pointing fingers at each other, basically saying, no, you're in charge of coming up with the CBD regulations. No, you're in charge of coming up with the CBD regulations. And meanwhile, nothing's getting done in Washington, D.C., Curt. How is this ever going to move forward with a chemical that so many people want to put in so many different products?
Unfortunately, this isn't a new story. Steve D'Angelo talks about this a lot too, where government agencies can call pass the buck and blame the other guy. So when the heat gets too much, whether it's an online petition or someone saying something of stature in public, oh, it's not us, it's the FDA, they have to move first. And then, of course, the DEA gets a lot of heat, whether it's for hemp or marijuana, and they say, oh, it's not us, you got to talk to the other guys. And they can just do this circle. Legalization changes that. Even though hemp from CBD is legal, the overriding factor is that THC level, and we need the full legalization of the cannabis plant.
And hopefully that may happen if the right people get elected in November. And I did say the right people. In the meantime, I can tell you that the right person that does our DC report every week is Phil Adams from the VotePro Podcast. Check it out.
Hi, Phil Adams from VotePro Podcast, here with this week's Weed Talk News DC report. The House of Representatives is calling on federal agencies to reconsider firing federal workers for using cannabis legally within their states. Among the provisions attached to the recent spending bill approved by the House Appropriations Committee is a directive for the Office of Personnel Management to, quote, review its policies and guidelines regarding hiring and firing of individuals who use marijuana in states where it is legal. A full House floor vote on the spending bill is still pending. The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws is circulating a petition calling on both President Trump and presumptive nominee Joe Biden to back comprehensive cannabis reform in advance of the November election. The petition states, quote, never in modern history has there existed greater public support for ending the nation's nearly century-long experiment with marijuana prohibition. According to NORML, within just a few hours after the petition was launched on Thursday, nearly 5,000 people had signed on. The Food and Drug Administration, in compliance with a congressional mandate, submitted its report to Congress on the state of the CBD marketplace, focusing on studies the agency has performed over the past 6 years on the quality and content of cannabis products. The report finds significant inconsistencies between cannabinoid concentrations that are listed on product labels and what the products actually contain. While the FDA is in the process of creating rules to ensure quality control, it is generally allowing CBD products to be sold while focusing on companies that make particularly outrageous claims about the benefits of their products. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from VotePro Podcast.
And finally tonight on Weed Talk News, it looks like the state of Israel is now number one. And that number one has to do with the total number of imports of cannabis into that tiny little state. Curt, they surpassed Germany with an import of 6 metric tons of medical marijuana.
Oy vey, that's a lot of kosher kush, Jimmy. A lot of kosher kush.
Hey, just leave it to my chosen people, my brethren, my tribesmen. We know how to have a good time, and more importantly, we got a lot of aches and pains. You know what I mean?
When you're in the desert for a couple hundred years, what's a little weed, right?
That's absolutely right. Whatever it takes to get through the day. And speaking of which, that's kind of been the theme of Weed Talk News this week. So, for Curt Dalton from Cannabis.net, I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. We'll see you next time on Weed Talk News. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Weed Talk Now, Weed Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, Cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.